The desert was supposed to kill Eleanor Hayes before anyone found her. That was the plan. At 70 years old, Eleanor knew she wouldn't survive long without water. Her lips were cracked. Her hands trembled. And the burning sun above the Arizona desert had turned the sand into a sea of fire. 3 days earlier, her own family had left her there. Her nephew, Caleb, had been the one to drive the wagon. He had looked at her through cold eyes and said, "I'm sorry, Aunt Eleanor. The ranch needs to belong to someone younger." Eleanor had stared at him in disbelief. "You promised your father you'd never betray me." Caleb hadn't answered. He had simply climbed back onto the wagon. Then he had left. Eleanor watched the wagon disappear into the dust. She knew exactly why they had done it. Her ranch was worth a fortune. The land stretched across hundreds of acres, with a river running through its western border. Caleb wanted it. And he had found a simple solution to the problem. An old woman dying in the desert couldn't sign a deed. Eleanor had spent 70 years surviving things that should have killed her. She had survived the death of her husband. She had survived a brutal winter. She had survived outlaws who once tried to steal her cattle. But she had never expected betrayal from her own family. Now she sat beneath a dead tree, holding a small metal flask. One sip of water remained. Eleanor looked at the flask. Then at the endless desert. She knew she was running out of time. But just as she closed her eyes, she heard something. A horse. Eleanor slowly lifted her head. Far in the distance, a rider appeared. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, 3 riders stood before her. The man in front was tall, gray-haired, and carried an old rifle across his saddle. He looked down at Eleanor. "Ma'am." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" The man removed his hat. "My name is Samuel Cross." Eleanor froze. She hadn't heard that name in nearly 40 years. Samuel looked at her carefully. "Are you Eleanor Hayes?" "Yes." The old man slowly smiled. "Then I believe I owe you a debt." Eleanor didn't understand. Samuel climbed down from his horse. He handed her a canteen. "Drink." Eleanor hesitated. "Why?" "Because 42 years ago, a young woman saved my life." Eleanor stared at him. She remembered. A young outlaw had once been shot near her ranch. She had hidden him from a group of bounty hunters. She had given him food, water, and a horse. She had never seen him again. Until now. "You were that boy," Eleanor whispered. Samuel nodded. "I was." He looked toward the horizon. "We heard what your family did." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Who told you?" Samuel pointed behind him. More riders were appearing. 1. Then 5. Then 10. Eleanor slowly stood. By sunset, 12 riders surrounded her. 12 men. All armed. All watching her. Samuel looked at Eleanor. "Your nephew thinks you're dead." Eleanor looked toward the distant horizon. "Let him." Samuel raised an eyebrow. Eleanor picked up her walking stick. "Take me home." The 12 riders turned their horses. And for the first time in 3 days, Eleanor smiled. Because she wasn't going home to beg for mercy. She was going home to take back what belonged to her. Caleb Hayes had already begun celebrating. 3 days after abandoning Eleanor, he returned to the family ranch. He told everyone the same story. His aunt had disappeared during the journey. They had searched for her. But the desert had taken her. No one questioned him. Not even the sheriff. Caleb had already prepared the documents transferring ownership of the ranch. All he needed was Eleanor's death certificate. Then the land would be his. But on the 3rd evening, something unexpected happened. A young ranch hand came running toward the house. "Mr. Hayes." Caleb stepped outside. "What is it?" The boy pointed toward the road. At first, Caleb saw nothing. Then dust appeared on the horizon. A long cloud of dust. And beneath it, riders. Caleb counted them. 1, 3, 6. Then 12. His face went pale. At the front rode an old woman. Eleanor. Alive. Caleb stumbled backward. No. Eleanor stopped her horse in front of the ranch. She climbed down slowly. Samuel Cross stood beside her. Caleb stared at him. "Who are you?" Samuel looked at him coldly. "Someone your family should remember." Caleb reached for his revolver. Immediately, 11 rifles were raised. Samuel didn't move. "Don't." Caleb froze. Eleanor walked toward the ranch house. "Where is my room?" Caleb stared at her. "This is my ranch now." Eleanor stopped. "No." She turned toward him. "It never was." Caleb laughed nervously. "You're 70 years old. You can't run this place anymore." Eleanor looked at the 12 riders. Then back at Caleb. "I don't need to run it." She pulled a folded document from inside her coat. "I only need to prove it belongs to me." Caleb's smile disappeared. The document was the original land deed. Signed by Eleanor's late husband. And witnessed by the territorial judge. Caleb stepped forward. "That's impossible." Eleanor smiled. "You should have searched the ranch before you left me to die." Caleb's face turned red. Samuel looked at him. "You made one mistake." Caleb stared at him. "What?" "You thought she was alone." Suddenly, the ranch door opened. The sheriff stepped outside. He had been watching everything. Caleb turned toward him. "Sheriff. Arrest these men." The sheriff didn't move. Eleanor looked at him. "Tell him." The sheriff lowered his eyes. "Tell me what?" "The truth." The sheriff swallowed. Eleanor stepped closer. "Caleb didn't tell you everything, did he?" The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Caleb shouted. "Don't listen to her." Eleanor pulled out another piece of paper. "This is a letter." She handed it to the sheriff. The sheriff read it. His face changed. It was a confession. Written by one of Caleb's men. The letter explained everything. Caleb had paid them to abandon Eleanor in the desert. He had planned to declare her dead and steal the ranch. The sheriff looked at Caleb. "Is this true?" Caleb reached for his gun. But Samuel was already pointing his rifle. Caleb stopped. Eleanor stepped closer. "You wanted my land." Caleb's voice trembled. "I was family." Eleanor looked at him sadly. "Family doesn't leave an old woman in the desert." Silence filled the ranch yard. Then Eleanor turned toward the 12 riders. "Take him." Caleb's eyes widened. "Where?" Samuel answered. "To the town." Caleb looked terrified. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She pointed toward the second rider. "And take the others who helped him." One by one, Caleb's accomplices were brought forward. The ranch hands who had helped him. The men who had lied to the sheriff. The men who had watched Eleanor leave. They were all arrested. But there was still one person Eleanor needed to face. A man who had helped Caleb plan everything. The sheriff. Eleanor looked at him. "You knew." The sheriff didn't answer. "You knew they were leaving me." The sheriff lowered his head. "I was afraid." Eleanor stared at him. Fear is an excuse cowards use when they want to sleep at night. The sheriff looked ashamed. Eleanor turned away. She had no interest in revenge against a weak man. Her revenge was already complete. She had returned. Alive. And with 12 witnesses. But Samuel approached her quietly. "There's something else." Eleanor looked at him. "What?" Samuel pointed toward the road. A distant rider was approaching. He carried a black flag. Samuel's face became serious. Caleb wasn't working alone. Eleanor stared into the distance. The rider stopped at the edge of the ranch. He didn't speak. He simply threw something onto the ground. A small wooden box. Eleanor recognized it immediately. It had belonged to her husband. Her heart began beating faster. Samuel picked it up. Inside was an old photograph. Eleanor looked at it. The photograph showed her husband standing beside 3 men. One of them was Samuel. Another was Caleb's father. And the third man was still alive. Eleanor's face went pale. Samuel looked at her. "There's one more person who wants your ranch." Eleanor stared at the photograph. "Who?" Samuel pointed toward the mountains. "The man who owns everything around you." Eleanor slowly understood. Her family hadn't betrayed her for the ranch. They had been paid to take it. And the real enemy was still watching. By sunrise, Eleanor knew exactly what she had to do. She rode with Samuel and the 12 men toward the northern edge of her property. There, beyond the mountains, stood the largest ranch in the territory. It belonged to Victor Blackwell, a wealthy landowner who had spent years buying everything around Eleanor's ranch. Everything except hers. Eleanor had refused every offer. Victor had tried to intimidate her. Then threaten her. But she had never surrendered. Now she understood why Caleb had betrayed her. Victor wanted the final piece. Her land. Eleanor and the 12 riders stopped outside Victor's ranch. Victor was waiting. He stood on the porch with 6 armed men. He looked at Eleanor. Then smiled. "I heard you died." Eleanor climbed down from her horse. "Disappointed?" Victor laughed. "You don't understand what is happening." "No," Eleanor replied. "I understand perfectly." She held up the old photograph. Victor's smile disappeared. "You knew my husband." Victor remained silent. Eleanor stepped forward. "You and Caleb's father planned to take my ranch 40 years ago." Victor looked at Samuel. "Where did you find her?" Samuel answered. "She found us." Eleanor smiled. Victor shook his head. "You're an old woman." Eleanor looked around at the 12 riders. "So are some of the men standing behind me." Samuel smiled. "But we're old men who remember." Victor's face hardened. He reached for his revolver. The 12 riders immediately raised their weapons. Victor stopped. Eleanor walked toward him. "You thought the desert would erase me." Victor stared at her. "You thought my family would betray me." She placed the photograph against his chest. "And you thought nobody would remember what you did." Victor looked at the photograph. Then at Samuel. His face changed. Samuel stepped forward. "I remember." Another rider stepped forward. "So do I." Then another. And another. One by one, the 12 men revealed that they had all known Victor. Some had worked for him. Some had been threatened by him. And some had lost family members because of his greed. Victor suddenly realized what Eleanor had done. She hadn't returned with 12 gunmen. She had returned with 12 witnesses. The sheriff arrived shortly afterward. This time, he brought federal marshals from the nearest territory office. Eleanor handed them the documents. The confession. The photograph. And the evidence proving Victor's land deals had been based on fraud. Victor was arrested. Caleb was convicted. And the ranch remained Eleanor's. But the story didn't end there. Months later, the old ranch began to change. The fences were repaired. The fields were planted. The dry well was restored. And the 12 riders stayed. They helped Eleanor rebuild the ranch. Samuel became her closest friend. And every evening, the two of them sat on the porch and watched the sunset. One evening, Samuel asked her a question. "Why didn't you kill Caleb?" Eleanor looked at the desert. "Because death would have been easy." Samuel waited. Eleanor continued. "I wanted him to live long enough to understand what he lost." Samuel smiled. "What did he lose?" Eleanor looked toward the ranch. "Family." The old woman was silent for a moment. Then she looked at the 12 riders. They thought they were leaving a 70-year-old woman in the desert. Samuel laughed. But they didn't know who she was. Eleanor smiled. "No." She looked toward the setting sun. "They knew exactly who I was." The truth was that Eleanor Hayes had never needed 12 riders to save her. She had survived 70 years without them. She had built her ranch with her own hands. She had buried the people she loved. She had faced outlaws, droughts, storms, and death itself. The 12 riders had not come to rescue her. They had come because she had once rescued them. And when the world finally turned against her, they remembered. Years later, people would tell the story differently. Some said Eleanor had returned from the desert with 12 deadly gunmen. Others claimed the 12 riders were the most dangerous men in the West. But Eleanor always corrected them. They weren't dangerous men, she would say. They were grateful men. And whenever someone asked how she survived 3 days alone in the desert, Eleanor would smile. She would point toward the horizon. Then she'd say, "Because I knew someone would come." But the truth was different. Eleanor had known exactly what she was doing. Before Caleb left her in the desert, she had secretly hidden a message inside her husband's old silver watch. A message only Samuel Cross could understand. A message that had been waiting 42 years to be delivered. That was why the 12 riders came. Not because Eleanor was helpless. But because she had planned her return before the wagon ever disappeared into the desert. And that was the greatest mistake Caleb Hayes ever made. He thought he was leaving a 70-year-old woman to die. But he had actually given her 3 days. 3 days to disappear. 3 days to gather 12 witnesses. And 3 days to prepare the most powerful revenge of her life. By the time Eleanor returned to her ranch, the people who betrayed her had already lost everything. And the woman they thought was dead was standing on her porch. Alive. Free. And finally home.